Hi, good morning, everybody. Hi, it's Ken Phelan, CTO from Gotham, back from after a little bit of a hiatus in these CTO tech talks, but people said they liked them. So even though I was taking summer off, I guess we're back to doing this. I have with me this morning Aviv from Votiro. Aviv is the CTO and one of the founders of Votiro. So I guess I'll let you do a little introduction to yourself. Aviv is in Tel Aviv, and he promised me that he was not going to start drinking till after this thing, which I think is very brave of him, because this is their Friday in Tel Aviv. But Aviv, any intro?
Yes, of course. So first, Ken, and of course, thank you very much for inviting me here. As you mentioned, I'm the CTO and founder of Votiro. I'm in the cybersecurity business for quite some time. So, in terms of my background, I started with, being curious about security when I was probably like 15 years old. Was, breaking stuff, for fun and, because I was curious how they work. When I was around 18, I just, was recruited to the Israeli Defense Force as a mandatory service here in Israel. And I learned a lot of skills of, around security, mostly around offense and defense operation. And I think one of the important, this learning for me from that time was that nothing is impossible. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs coming from that background. I was working for a couple of startups, and then I founded what today is called Votiro. So that's in terms of background. Of course, we could talk about that.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's always great to talk. Founders have a special, place in everyone's heart, right? Because I think that's the original vision for all of this stuff. And I guess we just talk a little bit about that, like what, it's a big move, right? Obviously, we've all got marketable skills, but to stop and say, I'm going to do this myself. Like, I really want to found a company to fix this problem. I mean, was it frustration? Was it, what was the driving force to make that leap for you to go from, I see a problem, to I'm going to fix the problem?
Yeah, so I think when I first encounter a problem, usually, I want to solve it. But one of the things before actually I knew that I want to solve this specific problem that I'm going to talk about is that when I was before founding Votiro, I was doing like services, penetration testing. I was traveling around the world doing security audits for companies. And for me, that was a pretty fun job for 20-something years old. Landing in some offices, interviewing the IT team, and after a few days, just showing them how valuable they are and how smart I am. That was pretty fun at the time. And one of the things that I found that there was one technique that just worked for me 100% of the time. It was just taking like a PDF and just weaponizing that PDF and applying for a job within that client. Just going to the website, saying, hey, I want to apply to this position. And by the way, I know Ken from the CTO office, and I'll be happy to provide reference. Call me back. And on the other side, I know there are, a guy or lady that their job is to screen hundreds of resumes a week. And it was just working 100% of the time. And when I was in the security for quite some time, I was fascinated. I was asking myself, how can it be that 20, 30 years after the first probably phishing campaign or worm, whatever it called back then in the 90s, was founded, we're still having the same issue and we're still having the same problem. And I think the change in my attitude for that problem was based on the fact that it was really tough not to crack.
Yeah. No, to your point, it's amazing and certainly frustrating for a lot of our customers that we've been at this for so long. There's so many levels of products in the space, and we're still frustrated. I did want to clarify something. So when I talked to your marketing team, they said they wanted to have this about zero. This is about zero trust. I said, oh, it's about zero. But I think that term means a lot of different things to different people in the industry. So I'd really like to have you sort of explain, when Votiro is talking about zero trust, and Aviv talking about zero trust, how do you define that term, and how do you see your fit in that from this solution space?
Yeah. So the zero trust term was probably coined several years ago. I think Forrester, one of their analysts coined that. And initially, that was mostly around the network connectivity and access. It was saying, we're not going to trust anyone. In fact, we're going to, in the firewall world, that would call deny all, right? And if someone want to have an access, we would open that just for this specific, let's say, resource. And then it was extended to the identity space, saying, okay, we're not just going to trust only those that we explicitly, trust, and we actually mentioned them. We also want to say, okay, this specific employee or user would connect to that specific asset. And that was mainly the world of zero trust. And on top of that, we're saying we're going to audit all access to any resource by any user. Now, I see actually the zero trust expanding into the content area, because eventually we restricting the user access, restricting the asset or the network access, but we're saying nothing about the data. Once the user is authenticated and he's eligible to access that resource, that's it. He can upload, he can download, he can actually mess with the content. There is nothing in that framework that say how we're going to deal with the content. And that's how we in Votiro, we see that as the content for zero trust concept. And that's where we're actually coming from. And we're saying, remember that guy that from the recruitment department in my clients that was screening hundreds of resumes. I mean, he's trusting that resume. He's trusting that PDF that I was sending them out of the blue from outside. Why? Because that's his job. So I was actually, as someone from the outside, I had to send that resume, and there was no problem with that. And he actually he had access to that resume. There was no problem with that. But the data was the problem. And I think that's where the zero trust architectural framework locks the data portion. That's where we come into play.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've been in cyber for some time too, but I originally came from an application side of this whole problem. I think you've seen cyber sort of evolve and mature from being a network problem to being, an identity problem, an application problem, a data problem. Like we really had to kind of go down the stack. And I think people that were sort of some of the first movers in cyber were really network people, and they haven't been well served as the problem has moved. I mean, do you find like it's an education conversation with people to kind of get them to really zero in on the problem this way, or?
Yeah, I think that, eventually originally we didn't have cybersecurity. We didn't have even, it was IT security. And before that, that was network. I'm not sure if the security was the thing.
Yeah.
So actually it was evolved from the network. Historically, it started from the network guy that told him, we need something to make sure that only the allowed users or allowed devices can connect. And eventually when the application evolved, I agree that applications were probably that's the most modern piece in that evolution.
Yeah. So I told you this before. When we were on for 5 minutes before the thing that your CEO Robbie sucked me into this conversation, like this live web conversation at RSA, and so he threw me some curveballs. So without too much apology, I want to ask you some of the tougher questions, because I think as you were saying before, there's a lot of tools in this space. Customers have all kinds of tools to look at content, to look at emails, to look at those things. And on top of that, it's sort of it's a tough budget environment, right? People are looking at every dollar they're spending right now. So, how do you help customers? And obviously it's your job to, champion this cause. Look at that technology stack and find a space for Votiro in it. Like what, how does that conversation happen? And how should customers think about, even broader than just Votiro? I think customers are challenged to look at all the stuff they're buying and figure out what's really making a difference. Right. So what's your perception on how customers should be approaching that sort of valuation and prioritization of tech stack?
Yeah. So I think that the couple of pillars, or maybe three pillars, for evaluating technology stack. I think one of them is compliance. That's pretty obvious, right? You need to have this and that. You don't have a lot of choices. Probably you would pick the cheapest product, or at least something that does the job, right? If it does the job, that's fine. But I think at least one of the other pillars is how to make the employee and the business flowing without interruption. Because some of the folks I'm talking with, they're a bit frustrated because they all know that they need to support the business, but in some way, some security, approaches that they're being perceived as the bad guy, as the cop that actually putting hurdles. And when I'm having more and more discussion with the CISOs and IT security, VP IT security out there, they all understand that they need to enable the business. And the way to do that is to really evaluate the security or the technology stack and say, what are the technologies that actually can enable the business? What are the technologies that not necessarily block stuff? And not necessarily saying to users, you need to ask for permission. And this is the process, this is a manual process or automatic process, but that actually slowed down the business. And the way I look at that is I think that most of the security folks, they're not looking enough on business enabling security. And I think that Votiro, as I believe that I founded the company, we are focusing on how to make sure that the business is flowing. For example, a lot of the email security product out there, they're blocking stuff. They're quarantining emails. I mean, we're hearing from customers saying, we're getting tons of IT help desk calls saying, hey, my email is in the spam. I cannot find this or that. This was blocked. And all of a sudden, they need to handle user that is waiting for, his email to do his job. And on the other side, there is someone in the IT help desk that just being, saying, okay, what am I doing? Just releasing emails. And when we look at that problem, we understood that we need to solve that tension between security and productivity. And the way we approach that is that we know all those attachments, all those files, no matter where they come from. I gave that email example. I would continue with it. That if, for example, I'm sending you a slide deck before I'm meeting with the prospect, for example, and your job is to open that. Now, if that will be quarantined, obviously that will be a waste of your time. But the way we look at that, instead of us or the security solution trying to find the bad stuff, let's say the security email gateway, try to find the malicious content in that slide deck, we actually, in our approach, and we're actually regenerating that slide deck and providing a safe version of that, delivering that immediately. So in any case, you're getting your content, we're not pointing a thing. So if a lot of security folks, they're frustrated because all those gray areas where we're saying, it's suspicious, so maybe I would block it. Or I'm not sure about that, an alarm was raised, I need to remediate that automatically, so I will disconnect that endpoint from the network. That eventually lead to business downtime. And most of the security folks say, in my organization, they won't allow it. They won't, swallow that. So evaluating a security stack through what technology actually enabling the business and not necessarily slowing it down, I think this is a view or perspective that at least I believe in, that a lot of more security folks should look through it.
Cool. I want to continue on that line because I think that is a critical area. And I think this whole space, the CDR space, has been perceived as having operational impact in the past, right? And I know you guys have been doing some work on it. I think it's really important that people understand that. And I think as security people, I really resonate with what you're saying. And I have this conversation, and with apologies, it's sometimes I cast it as a Israeli-American thing that, because you said you come out of the IDF, and when you got, and obviously there's a huge amount of cybersecurity innovation coming from Israel. I said, but when sometimes some of these Israeli companies, they tend to look a very military, like getting breaches, like getting shot. Like anything's worth avoiding a breach. And I think Americans tend to be more sort of fiscally risk-based. They think about these problems in terms of what it's going to cost, what the effectiveness is. And so, whatever, if you have a $100 million payroll and someone gives you something that's going to have a 0.5% productivity decrease, 0.5% doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a $500,000. That's a lot of productivity decrease, right? So you have to really see a significant chance of risk to take even a small productivity hit. So, and obviously some of the CDR stuff early on, as you said, like they were just converting to PDFs or doing whatever else they're doing, and people, there was a big kickback against that. So, how have you guys matured that space? Because you're making a pretty big claim saying that you have no operational impact. Can you kind of color that in for us and explain how how this fits into a fiscal risk versus a getting shot mentality?
Of course. So for the folks here that they're not familiar with the term CDR, so CDR is content disarmament reconstruction. That's one of the core technologies where our product relies on. That means that we're taking the content, we actually reconstruct it to a safe version of that that looks and feels exactly the same. Now, you can mention that originally, at least the first generation of this technology, it had a lot of productivity issues. And the reason for that was exactly what you mentioned. The roots of this technology, that's from the probably military kind of government space, where exactly as you mentioned, I mean, we would there's no chance that we allow any threat coming in, no matter, I mean, at all costs. So that was the idea behind the first generation of CDR. That was, as you mentioned, converting documents. So if you have a Word document, we can convert that to a PDF document and deliver that. The truth is, it's extremely safe. We all agree about that. But if you cannot use that Word document because you want to edit it, you want to use track changes, stuff like that, that's unusable. So it doesn't work for any business. That was the first generation of CDR. That was probably around 10 years ago. The second generation of CDR that was taking those documents, let's say like Excel spreadsheet, we're all familiar with the macro, VBA macro threads, and just dropping all those active elements. Let's drop macros, let's drop OLE objects, embedded objects, stuff like that. It is safer than doing nothing, but yet when when we got with this approach to financial organization, told us, but we still need the macros. I mean, a lot of our financial department folks, they're still getting those macro enabled documents. That's actually an application. They need to have that. You cannot really remove that for them. And then a few years ago, we introduced the third generation of CDR, what we call positive selection. And the idea is that we're taking all the content from those documents, and then we move them to a safe template of that exact same file type. So we're taking, for example, with the Excel spreadsheet, we're taking tables, charts, formulas, all the sheets, everything inside. We move that to a fresh template. Looks and feel exactly the same. In fact, the user cannot even notice that we were there. Now, what we did with the more challenging parts, like the macros and stuff. So we actually introduced more modern approach using AI. So what we did is we mapped all the language of the macros out there, and we actually can know how a benign macro should look like, and what are the instructions in terms of the keywords that this actually a benign macro. And so using that machine learning and AI into the third generation of CDR, which is called positive selection, we were able to deliver near perfect quality of documents, where we said, we actually measuring that, and our customers, the users, they just don't notice that we are there. We're just delivering the exact same file format with the exact same experience, and thanks to that, we can avoid a lot of the quarantine and business impact. Now, you asked about how we actually quantify that, to dollars in some way. So we're not necessarily looking just at the risk. We're looking also on the productivity. For example, one of our customers, they told us that they're having a lot of password protected emails and documents and archives, and they just been wondering what to do in terms of policy. Now, some organizations allowing them in, some organization blocking all those encrypted archives altogether. Now, they were specifically blocking the archives and the documents. Now, eventually what happened is the user get a notification, your attachment was blocked because it's password protected. It gets to the IT help desk, and they were getting tons of requests from users saying, hey, I need to have my password protected document. The user, the IT help desk guy or lady, they're just asking the simple question, right? Do you know the sender? Have you expected that document? Yes, yes. Okay, I'm releasing that for you. Now, what actually happened is that thanks to the fact that it's encrypted, the security stack was just, was blinded, because no one could scan encrypted attachments. From productivity side, the user didn't get his data on time. So we lost on both fronts. And then we understood that we actually can help. And we introduced a workflow. When a password protected content coming in, we asking the user to type in the password. Once they typing in the password, we're decrypting the document, doing all the magic of CDR, and then delivering that to the user. In fact, that automated workflow reduced the number of tickets, and at the same time increases the security. So we actually we actually increase productivity and security, which some would say that is sometimes impossible. So I would definitely say that if you're measuring the number of times, but that in the cases where IT help desk are dealing with releasing stuff, where there are a lot of manual and not streamlined content import processes into the organization, that's probably where Votiro can help and can streamline and help the business even trust the security, saying, okay, you actually help us, not stopping us to do our job.
Yeah, I think the productivity commitment is critical, and I think I like how you guys are doing that. But again, I've had this conversation with other people at Votiro. I love, I think it's genius, right? That there's, and I call them sort of the fat, dumb, happy solutions, like finding good and making sure that everything that comes through is good is a very effective way of blocking unknown threats, things that might, there's a very broad spectrum of thing you're doing when you're taking that approach. The sort of negative selling problem is every day you're not going to come up with a list of problems I solved today. Like, you're not finding bad things. You're just making sure only good things get through. I mean, do you see that as a challenge? Do you think that's, I mean, obviously it's a good approach, but how do you kind of, sell into that or convince people of that? Because you're not going off every day with a list of 100 things you stopped.
Yeah.
Is that a problem in your mind?
So that's interesting. That depends. I mean, if you would ask me, we're reducing the alert fatigue. There's
Right.
tons of alerts in organization that just flooding everyone, and there's no chance you can respond to all of those, right? But you're right. If we're not generating those tons of alerts, maybe the customer say, I'm not sure what exactly you're doing. So what we did is we actually introduced on top of our CDR threat intel engines. So actually we can tell what actually we're able to sanitize in this case. In fact, if you would look, we have some significant cases where we actually sanitize the file, so we deliver the safe content, but only, let's say, 5 days after we deliver that safe content, that original piece was found to be malware out there. So we actually introduced a retrospective scanning. So actually we can tell a week ago, you received a Word document. That was originally malicious. Don't worry, you are safe. But now we can tell you that this was malicious. No one else in the world knew that because the detection engines out there, they know that just now. So we're able to show that. Obviously, I'm not a huge fan of throwing alerts out there, but giving the intel that they really need to know that we were effective and we helped them on the security front. But obviously, that was a question that originally we had until we introduced those in threat intel add-ons.
That's cool. Because I think it's also important, when customers are sort of evaluating a technology, looking at it, trying to figure out, where it fits in the stack networks. It's sort of a challenging conversation to have that. So sometimes, do you think that one of the challenges again with that economy is just time to value becomes super important, right? If I'm going to buy something, anything, it's got to be valuable day one. It can't take a long time to implement. Do you think that's something you guys do a good job of? Do you think that that's a situation where is there a challenge to getting this deployed, or is it kind of coming kind of easily?
Yeah, so we introduced Votiro several years ago as a SaaS platform. So actually, this shortened the implementation time to from days to potentially minutes. If you talk about integrating with Office 365, that's just a matter of clicks, and you started to be protected and increase the productivity. But on top of that, we do have integrations with, for example, Box file sharing, or Slack, for example, OneDrive, SharePoint. So all those platforms, when you're adding more and more connectors, as we call it, you increase the level of visibility, but obviously that would take more time. So I would say if you want to onboard Votiro for the first two kind of sources of documents, that will probably take minutes, and then eventually you will see that how value it's for you, and of course you can add more. But I would say that time to value in terms of implementation, that's minutes, and within hours, you can sense actually the protection and productivity.
It's kind of cool. I was looking at a lot of your, some of your marketing says, doing some research because everyone just show up to this thing. And a lot of it talks about like sort of 0 days and I was looking at all that stuff. But I think a lot of customers are just more concerned about patching cadences. I mean, the dirty secret is that patching's hard and most people are struggling with it. Do you
Exactly right.
feel like that this is a solution that helps in sort of that patching cadence problem as well, or is it really more for just the unknowns?
So, I think that was maybe 10, 12 years ago that 0 days in terms of the term was a big thing. I mean, there are 0 days today, obviously.
Yeah.
I think the vendors doing a decent job in patching some of those, but when they release the patch, maybe that would take maybe days. Um, but then, as you mentioned, patching that in the organization would take way longer than that. In fact, we see that a lot of the attacks that we stop, it's not necessarily stuff that is, really, really new. We're just helping our customers that they don't need to rush with the patch. I mean, or at least reduce the risk of the fact that their patching cycle takes at least a week because they need to test that on certain servers. Maybe they need to roll it out gradually. So at least we help them to make sure that they're protected from day one and not necessarily, or day zero, to be accurate, if we talk about 0 days, but not necessarily, chase the patch within hours, which a lot of customers saying that this is risky. We know that the greatest downtime in systems out there sometimes happen because of early patching that was not tested as expected. Yeah.
Yeah, back down to that operational impact problem.
Yeah.
So just because there's a new federal law about it, we have to talk about AI a little bit. You mentioned that there's some new AI features that you guys are putting in, things that you're doing. So how do you think some of the AI changes are going to affect your product development? Where do you guys think you're strong in that? Where do you think you're going to head in that direction? Because I think that's part of everybody's story right now about how they're going to leverage AI to make people
Yeah.
safer.
So yeah, so actually we're talking a lot about that internally. Obviously, I think there is no one company in the world that they don't think how they can really leverage AI in their product portfolio and offering and technology stack. I think that the two things that first affect the way that we look at the world. One is that the bad guys are using AI. Obviously, a lot of the phishing attacks, they're getting more and more sophisticated. I think that if we used to just spot the phishing, but just looking at the grammar issues or some language problems, it's getting really, really hard now, thanks to the fact that they're using AI. So fooling the users actually is getting easier. This is one aspect. As we see AI, we actually collect indicators from the documents and the content, and we're feeding that into our cloud intelligence platform. We're now collecting all those data in order to generate some meaningful intel about the things that we can actually tell our customers based on that. So this is one aspect of AI. The other aspect that we're actually using today, as I mentioned, is to distinguish between a malicious macro and a benign macro, which is a problem. But thanks to the fact that we can train model and then we can use them in order to determine for new macros out there that actually help us to speed and of course improve the efficacy of our solution. So that's how we see AI these days. Of course, we have some new stuff that we're gonna release soon, mostly around the content of the documents and getting more insights about both operational, but both understanding more about what actually what is the stream of the content that actually you're getting from Slack, from Box, from Dropbox, and how we can actually improve the business. But this is kind of plan that we're still working on.
Yeah, I would say that the generative AI thing in email goes past just better grammar. I think what we're going to see is people using that stuff at scale to basically pick up data off the internet about you, off your LinkedIn page, and then create custom. Like you were saying, like the key to your email scam when you were doing it as a kid was just saying a couple of things that they'll trust about. I see you did this. I see you're in the city, like whatever. And they're going to be able to build that kind of trust by scraping the internet, going to the generative AI systems, and do really, really excellent, trustworthy emails at scale to everyone in your organization, not just your CEO. I think we're going to see some really exciting, big scale spear phishing.
Yeah, and I'm also sure that the bad guys will also use that, like a ChatGPT like
Yep.
capability in order to have to automate the interactions. Because if you look at the bad guy workshop, you need to answer all those guys that actually answer his phishing emails. So probably they're going to use that for their advantage as well.
Yeah, it's gonna get much more exciting. Um, so just a couple more. I mean, since we're wrapping up here, what do you see in the future? Like, where's Votiro heading? What's 2024 look like for you guys? What do you see as a direction and where this goes forward?
Yeah. So one of the things that I briefly mentioned that we are focusing on these days is really how to leverage the capabilities of dissecting the content, no matter where it come from, whether it's come from upload portal or Slack box, Dropbox, or browser, and leverage it for more than just security. One of the things that we're looking at is around PII and compliance. We're seeing a lot of demand from customers saying, I want to know what's in my document, but potentially if you're already reconstructing a document, can you redact some of that? So for example, if there shouldn't be any PII coming through email because we have a dedicated system for that, I want to redact all the social security numbers coming from potential clients that may be sending some stuff through email to my brokers. And right now, I mean, with the DLP world, maybe they can block it, but they don't want to block a thing. They would just redact it and respond back. They don't want to be liable for that. So this is a significant development that we are working on these days. And on top of that, enriching what we do and providing the zero trust for content, and enriching that with more threat intel. So as you mentioned, adding more indicators, telling what exactly was in those attacks. So threat hunting team can also benefit from that.
Terrific. All right, well, those are my questions. I didn't share them with you before. I think this has been terrific. But what questions should I have asked you? Is there anything you'd like to talk about that we didn't talk about? Did you have any questions for me? If you were Robbie, you'd give me some questions. You'd be a pain in the neck.
Yeah, so I think what I'm interested in is definitely to know what you see in the market in terms of content security and what you see from your partners and your folks in terms of trends and stuff that would be interesting at least for me to know.
Yeah, no, listen, I think we're obviously we're having this conversation because I think it's a very interesting technology. It is the way to solve this critical breach we haven't solved for 20 years, right? Which is these kinds of attacks coming through content, right? Getting finally getting CDR right, I'll say, right, in an operational framework that achieves for people is certainly worth doing. So I think, even though I said before, I think budgets are tight and people are looking to do the right things. I think these kind of broad scale solutions, I'll call them, right? Because it's not, we're very good at, as cyber technologists, whatever. Like if we got shot in the shoulder, we'd buy a big piece of armor and put it here. And if we get shot the next day, we put another piece of armor there. We don't sometimes think about how do I stop a whole plethora of attacks at one choke point? I think this does that. So I think, as people prioritize what they're looking to do and how they do it, and what the effectiveness is, I think, an effective CDR Votiro kind of program will serve people well. To your point, even if patching is tough, even if this is tough, even if you have cuts in other parts of your systems and you're having trouble with your IR program, like all those things, like what's one simple thing I can do that kind of counterbalances all that other stuff that's going to happen? I think this is a good solution for people. So I think that's why we're having the conversation. I think people need to take these broad scale programs at these choke points, realizing that it's always a trade-off, right? We can't do everything well. So what's the one or two things we can do that are going to make us, safer across the spectrum of things? So hopefully that's a motion we see in the marketplace. Because again, people have to make tough choices. I was talking to someone the other day, and they basically said something to the effect of, at a board level, we've decided to get less secure and accept risk just because that's the nature of our business model right now. And that's difficult to hear as a CISO from your board. But that's the place some places are at. But even given that, what's the right bet to make, right? If that's the tough game we're playing, okay, what are we going to do about that? So I think that's what we're seeing happen in 2024. We're still, obviously, people are still making decisions to stay safe. You just have to make the right decisions.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. I think that you mentioned about having a more holistic approach. So obviously, customers are looking for a more platform kind of oriented solution, and with more integrations. We decided to focus a lot of integrations. So we haven't talked about that, but for example, S3 buckets, all those cloud applications that are being developed out there. So we integrate with that and making sure that these are safe as well. On top of the other stuff, this is also important. And of course, we have that API. So customers saying, I can connect you to all those kind of integrations, and having at least one solution that will be the standard, what that would reduce the pressure of chasing alerts, of patching, and at least I can, I mean, I don't, to some extent, to sleep well and say, okay, I'm protected and I don't have to chase that at least as that often. So that's obviously something that we see in the market. And of course, as I mentioned, a lot of customers, they're moving their application even more to the cloud. So we see attraction where they want to protect everything that's getting uploaded. So they don't want to have customers sending emails with data. They want to make sure that they upload data to the automated system. It's being stored somewhere. So we're seeing a lot of integrations coming through that source when there are not a lot of security solutions out there protecting that specific way of entry point. And we see bad guys also leveraging that. So that's definitely something I'm seeing, at least that will be probably will get stronger for next year.
Yeah, I mean the data ecosystem is just getting more and more complicated, and I think that's just part of the reality of this. When we think about file systems, everyone notices the email is everybody's file system, right? It's the place where everyone stores documents, finds documents. It's the place where all of that stuff kind of exists. Well, eventually we do kind of come out of that, like you say, between Box and S3 buckets and all the rest of the stuff. But fundamentally, when you really stop to think about your data as a corporation, your data is not your data. It's all your partners, all your ecosystems, all your customers. This problem of getting resumes isn't just an HR problem. We're all getting data and files from all of our customers and our vendors all the time. There is no such thing as just this. My data is my data. It's everybody's data. That's fair to point out. Cool. I don't know if there's any questions that anybody else has that's on the line. If I don't know, Ali, if you're getting anything in the chat that you can share, or if anybody wants to raise their hand, is that a thing we can do on this? Usually everyone's pretty quiet on these. All right, I'm gonna go with no. All right, well that's anything else? Ali, any closing words? Anything else?
No, I think
before you head off to get your whiskey at now 5 o'clock in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, so yeah, that's my last meeting for this week, because we're working here Sunday to Thursday. So it was a pleasure ending my week with you, Ken. As I mentioned, my view is at least how to see that whether we can provide more business enabling solutions and products. Of course, I'm happy for everyone in the audience to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would love to hear the feedback, as I think that that's the best way to learn and to hear opinions. So feel free to reach out. We'd love to have a chat, and of course, virtual coffee whenever you want.
Awesome. Well, it's great seeing you. Good seeing you as always. And thanks everybody for joining. We'll have this up on YouTube for a while, I guess, if you want to share it with some of your other friends and partners.